Right, welcome back. So to continue our discussion of intervals and inversions, we learned that if you inverted a sixth, you got a third. If you inverted a fourth, you got a fifth. And the same thing happens if you invert a second, you get a seventh. And so inversions are really a natural and integral part of our tonal music. And it's just the way that we organize the notes in a given scale, the number of notes that are in that given scale that make that possible. Now we're going to talk about chord inversions, and similarly that when we started talking about a foundation that the third and the sixth were really integral parts of tonal music, and we also discussed that things like parallel fifths, which sound just blah to our ears, we avoid those sorts of things. And so if we were to build a progression of just root chords, which, for example, if I did C, E, G, it's not really great music composition structure. We really want to be able to introduce the sixth and the third together wherever possible, and to introduce that sixth more frequently. And so now let's just take a look here down at this chart. You're going to see the three different inversions for your standard chord. And you're going to see there's going to be some different aspects to how it's notated, as well as to the positions of the notes in that triad. And the reason why we started with intervals before we really got into this depth here is it helps us understand how these intervals are built using the same notes, as well as why we number them the way we do to indicate what is a root chord, a first inversion, and a second inversion. So starting with the C major chord, C, E, G in root position, we have C, E, and G. Now there's two ways to notate this. You're going to see that the first way is not really the common way. And the way that you see me notate chords in root position thus far have been without any numbers whatsoever. But it's important to know that there is actually a numerical way that we represent a root chord, C, E, G. And so you're going to see that it takes the first interval, which is C to E, and that makes a third. So that's the bottom number in any of our inversions. The second thing that you're going to notice is now we have a 5 at the top. And the 5 is actually denoting what is a top interval. So from C to G, that's a fifth. So the top note, that's our first interval, which is a fifth, which is the top number, which is a 5, to tell us that's the inversion that we're in. And the second note, which is our third, C to E, that is our number 3. And so that's how we're classifying a root chord. Now, like we've talked about before, we want to avoid just staying with fifths. We don't want to move in succession with fifths. We really want to move to those intervals of 6 or 7 or even seconds, which really add a lot of dissonance and discord to your music, but also adds a lot of really great colors and flavors. So let's look at the first inversion of a C major chord. So we started off with C, E, G. Now we're going to play it with the second note in the chord. So E, G, C. Now you've noticed how it's notated with a 6-3 or a 6. And it's the same idea, same concept that we worked out with the chord in root position. And when you notice, when we go to actually analyze music, which I'm going to show you some examples in the next video, which will be a lot of fun, you're going to see that it's notated first inversion usually with just a 6. We don't need to throw in the 3. It's kind of confusing. A little extra work, just like with the root position, we don't write in 5-3, we just leave it as the chord number, and that's good enough for us. But let me just break it down for you, just like we did with the root position, just to help build your understanding. So it's built off the interval, so from our E to C, that's a 6, so that's why it's the top number. And our second interval, which is a third, C to G, that's our second number, it's number 3. But in this case, first inversion, we just notate it as a 6. Now if we're going to continue on, and now we're going to play the next note in the inversion. Now we're going to go to G, C, E. So we're staying with the same notes, but now we're starting with the fifth note in that original root chord in our second inversion. And you're going to notice that there's really just one way to notate or dictate this, and it's a 6-4. So let's just take a look. So you have your G to E, which is a sixth, and you have your second interval, which is the G to C, which is a fourth. So that's the basic structure when we're notating and analyzing music. And when we're moving through chords, we don't like to go, again, like I said, root position. It might sound okay, but really when you're basing things off of a fifth and in parallel, it's not going to be really the quality music that you're really wanting to compose. So let's hear parallel fifths, so parallel root chords, versus parallel inverted chords, which is based off of the sixth. And let's see if your ears can truly pick out the difference. So I'm going to start with the root chords in parallel. Okay, sounds all right. But now I'm going to base this off of first inversion. So if you remember, you've got your first interval, which is a sixth, and your second interval, which is a third. Okay? And you get a lot more flavor with that. It doesn't sound so open because our primary interval, the sixth, is what's being represented. The same thing happens if we do it in second version. So our first interval is still a sixth, and our second interval is a fourth. A couple other things to understand. So when we're moving through chords, and you're going to see here, I have the 5 chord, I have a 1 in first inversion, I have a 7 chord in second inversion, and then I have a 5 chord as well in second inversion. But I've actually even added an extra note in there to make it into a second inversion. I want you to hear how this is going to be a more pleasant movement in our progression when we're writing music than if we were to just play these in blocks and in the root position. So I'm going to play 5, 1, 7, 5, but all in root position. And I'm going to play that first, and then I'm going to play what I have up here on the screen. So here we go. So okay. So it's kind of choppy, going from 5, 1, 7, 5, all in root position. And it really doesn't give us really this kind of moving feeling that we're looking for in music. It's not very well written. But when we introduce inversions, so here we go. You get more of a smoother feel to the music, and you're able to do a lot better voice leading. You're able to do a lot more interesting things. Ultimately, when it comes to the accompaniment, when you're thinking about trying to move around all over the keyboard, trying to find root positions, it can be really challenging when you're breaking the chord down into an arpeggio, into other different types of rhythmic or note formats. So by keeping this in inversion, it keeps everything in a closer space, and you don't have to move around so much, and it's much easier to play as a performer, and ultimately it sounds better to our ears. So that's chord inversions. The next part we get to go to is the circle of fifths. This is my favorite, and this is something we've really been building up to so far in tonal music. So far we've learned about how the dominant is really in play. So far we've learned the subdominant and the tonic, and now we've learned about intervals and really what the predominant intervals should be and how we invert chords. And we're going to have a side video that's going to give you an example of how we analyze music. But the next really big juicy topic is going to be the circle of fifths, which I'm really excited to share with you. I'll see you soon.